Claire stared at the unsigned marriage contract on the marble kitchen island while rain hammered against the penthouse windows 30 stories above Manhattan. The paper trembled slightly between her fingers, not because she was cold, because she finally understood what this marriage really was. Ethan Blackwood did not marry her because he loved her. He married her because his grandfather's inheritance demanded a wife before his 35th birthday, and Claire had been desperate enough to say yes. The city lights reflected across the polished floor as Ethan loosened his tie without looking at her. "You should get some sleep," he said quietly. Calm, controlled, like the last 6 months of marriage had been nothing more than another business arrangement. Claire swallowed hard. Was any of it real? Ethan finally looked up, and for the first time since she met him, the billionaire who never broke under pressure looked shaken. A muscle tightened in his jaw. "Claire," but she laughed softly before he could finish. Not angry, not dramatic, just hurt. "I defended you to everyone," she whispered, "even when they called me the gold digger." Silence filled the room. Heavy, brutal. Ethan's eyes drifted toward the tiny ceramic mug beside the sink. The cheap $5 mug she painted for him during their first month together. World's grumpiest husband. He used it every morning. Never missed a day. Claire noticed his stare, and her chest tightened even more. Because suddenly none of this made sense anymore. A man pretending to love her would not memorize how she took her coffee. He would not wait outside her late-night bookstore shifts in the rain. He would not silently replace her broken apartment heater before they moved out. And he definitely would not look at her now like losing her would destroy him. Ethan stepped closer slowly. "You think I fell in love after the contract," he said. His voice rougher now. Honest. Dangerous. "But the truth is, I was already falling the moment you refused to sign it the first night." Claire froze. The memory hit instantly. Him sliding the contract toward her in that cold attorney office. Her pushing it back, saying, "If I do this, you treat me like a human being, not a purchase." Ethan had smiled that day. Small. Almost invisible. She thought it meant nothing. But now, "You were the only person in this city who looked at me like I was more than my last name," he admitted quietly. "And that terrified me." Claire's eyes burned. Outside, thunder rolled across the skyline. Ethan moved closer again until only inches separated them. No arrogance now. No billionaire mask. Just a man who looked exhausted from fighting his own feelings too long. "I thought I could control it," he whispered. "The marriage. The emotions. The ending." His voice cracked slightly. "I was wrong." Claire opened her mouth to answer when suddenly Ethan's phone exploded with notifications across the counter. Headlines. Messages. Emergency calls from his board. Ethan glanced down once, and his face went completely pale. Claire grabbed the phone before he could stop her. Her heartbeat stopped instantly. Blackwood CEO secret marriage contract leaked online. Millions of views climbing by the second. Photos. Legal documents. Her name everywhere. And underneath the article, thousands of comments calling her a scammer who trapped a billionaire for money. Claire slowly looked back at Ethan. "Who leaked this?" she whispered. But Ethan was already reaching for his coat with a terrifying calmness in his eyes Claire had never seen before. "My brother," he said coldly. "And this time, I am done protecting him." The elevator doors opened directly into Blackwood Tower's executive floor at 6:12 the next morning, and every conversation instantly died. Claire felt it immediately. The stairs. The whispers. The phones lowering too slowly. Manhattan glowed pale silver through the massive glass windows while employees pretended not to recognize the woman now trending across every social media platform in America. Gold digger. Contract wife. Billionaire scammer. The words still echoed in her head like poison. Ethan walked beside her in complete silence, one hand tucked inside the pocket of his charcoal overcoat, jaw tight enough to crack stone. He had not slept. Neither had she. The leaked documents spread overnight like wildfire. News anchors dissected their marriage. Financial bloggers analyzed the inheritance clause. Strangers online debated whether Claire deserved millions for playing wife. Nobody asked how humiliating it felt to have the most painful moment of her life turned into entertainment. Ethan stopped outside the boardroom doors. "You do not have to go in there," he said quietly. Claire looked up at him. His eyes softened instantly despite the storm surrounding them. "If you walk away right now," he continued, "I will handle this alone." For one dangerous second, Claire wanted to say yes. She wanted to disappear back into her tiny bookstore apartment life, where nobody knew her name. But then she remembered the comments attacking her family, her late mother, her character. She straightened her shoulders slowly. No, she whispered. Your brother wanted me humiliated. I am not giving him that. Something flickered across Ethan's face then. Pride. Real pride. He opened the doors for her himself. The boardroom was ice cold. 12 executives sat around the polished black table while giant screens displayed financial reports and media headlines. At the far end sat Daniel Blackwood, Ethan's younger brother. Perfect navy suit. Relaxed posture. A smile so calm it almost looked friendly. Claire hated it instantly. Daniel leaned back slowly as they entered. Well, he said smoothly, America's favorite newlyweds have arrived. Ethan did not respond. He pulled out a chair for Claire first before taking his own seat beside her. Small gesture. Quiet. But every executive noticed it. Daniel's smile faded just slightly. The company lost 12% in market value overnight, Daniel continued casually. Investors do not like scandals involving fraudulent marriages. Claire felt heat rise in her chest. Fraudulent. Ethan's voice cut through the room like steel. Careful. Daniel shrugged. Am I wrong? Silence. Thick. Dangerous. Then Daniel tapped a button and another image appeared on the screen behind him. Claire's old apartment building. Grainy photos of her carrying groceries. Leaving work exhausted. Wearing thrift store clothes. Our shareholders deserve transparency, Daniel said smoothly. Especially regarding the woman who manipulated her way into the Blackwood inheritance. Claire's stomach dropped. Ethan stood so suddenly his chair slammed backward across the marble floor. Every executive flinched. Ethan rarely lost control. You hired someone to follow my wife? He asked quietly. That calm voice terrified the room more than yelling ever could. Daniel spread his hands. Public relations research. Ethan moved closer slowly. You leaked private legal documents. You invaded her life. And now you are standing in front of me pretending this is about shareholders. Daniel's expression hardened for the first time. This company belongs to this family, Ethan. Grandfather built it with discipline, not emotions. You married a stranger to unlock an inheritance clause. Do not pretend this was some fairy tale romance. Claire looked down instinctively. Because that part was true. The contract had been real. The beginning had been transactional. But before shame could swallow her completely, Ethan spoke again. No, he said coldly. The contract was real. My feelings were not the lie. The entire room froze. Claire slowly looked up at him. Ethan never exposed emotion publicly. Never. Yet now he stood in front of billion-dollar executives with absolutely no hesitation in his voice. I fell in love with my wife, he continued. And if anyone in this room thinks humiliating her protects this company, they can resign today. Nobody moved. Nobody even breathed too loudly. Daniel stared at his brother carefully now. Calculating. Interesting, he murmured. Because according to the prenup, if Claire leaves the marriage before 12 months, she receives nothing. Claire blinked. Ethan's head snapped toward Daniel instantly. Enough. But Daniel kept going. Which means if she stays now, every media outlet in America will believe she stayed for money. Claire felt the words hit like glass. Because Daniel was right. No matter what she did now, people would twist it. Leave Ethan? Gold digger exposed. Stay with Ethan? Gold digger securing the payout. Trapped either way. Daniel leaned forward slowly. Tell me, Claire, how much public humiliation is worth a billionaire lifestyle? Ethan moved immediately. Do not answer that. But Claire suddenly stood on her own. Her hands trembled slightly at her sides. Not from fear anymore. Anger. Months of swallowed insecurity finally boiling over. She looked directly at Daniel. You know what is funny? She asked softly. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Claire smiled sadly. You spent all this effort trying to prove I married Ethan for money. She glanced toward Ethan briefly before continuing. But you never once considered the possibility that someone could actually love your brother. Silence crashed through the room. Daniel's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Claire stepped closer now. Do you know why? She whispered. Because you cannot imagine loving someone without turning it into a transaction. Ethan stared at her like he forgot the entire room existed. Daniel's jaw tightened hard. Claire reached into her purse slowly, then placed something on the boardroom table. A black credit card attached to her name. The one Ethan gave her after they married. Untouched. I never used it, she said quietly. Not once. Several executives exchanged shocked looks immediately. Daniel frowned. Claire continued. I kept working at the bookstore 3 days a week because I wanted something that belonged to me. Her voice cracked slightly now, but she forced herself to continue. So if your goal was to make me feel small today, congratulations. But at least I know who I am. The room stayed silent for several unbearable seconds. Then unexpectedly, one of the older board members cleared his throat. For what it is worth, the gray-haired man said carefully, I believe her. Another executive nodded slowly. Then another. Daniel noticed immediately. Control was slipping. Ethan noticed too. But instead of looking victorious, he looked at Claire with something far more dangerous. Love. Unfiltered now. No walls left. Daniel saw it too. And suddenly his expression changed completely. Cold calculation replacing arrogance. He stood slowly. You think this is over? He asked quietly. Ethan stepped beside Claire instantly. It is over for you. Daniel smiled once more. Thin. Sharp. No, brother. It starts tonight. He walked toward the exit before stopping beside Claire one final time. By midnight, he said softly enough only she could hear. You are going to learn why people like us never marry for love. Then he walked away while Claire stood frozen beside Ethan. Because for the first time since this nightmare began, she realized Daniel was not trying to destroy the marriage. He was trying to destroy Ethan himself. By 8:30 that night, rain flooded the streets outside the Blackwood Foundation Gala, while camera flashes exploded non-stop against the arriving black cars. Claire stood frozen inside the penthouse dressing room, staring at the silver gown laid carefully across the bed. Ethan's assistant delivered it an hour earlier with no note attached. No pressure, no instructions, just the dress. Claire touched the fabric softly, her chest tightening again. Even after the nightmare of the morning, Ethan still remembered her favorite color. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan blurred beneath heavy storm clouds. Her phone would not stop vibrating. More articles, more insults, more strangers debating whether her marriage was real. Claire finally silenced the device and closed her eyes. She should not go tonight. Every instinct told her to disappear before the media circus got worse. But Daniel's words haunted her. By midnight, you're going to learn why people like us never marry for love. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Ethan stepped quietly into the room wearing a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, though exhaustion shadowed his face now. He stopped the second he saw her standing beside the dress. Neither spoke immediately. The silence between them no longer felt awkward. It felt fragile. Ethan loosened his cufflinks slowly. You do not have to attend tonight, he said gently. Claire almost laughed. You already said that this morning. I meant it both times. His voice stayed calm, but his eyes betrayed him completely. He was worried about her. Really worried. Claire looked away first. If I hide now, Daniel wins. Ethan walked closer slowly. Claire, she turned back toward him. Tell me the truth. He stilled instantly. About what? Your brother. Her voice softened. What happened between you two? Ethan's jaw tightened immediately. For several long seconds, he said nothing. Then finally, he exhaled hard and sat on the edge of the bed like the weight of years had suddenly become unbearable. My father loved appearances more than people, he said quietly. Success. Reputation. Perfection. Claire listened silently. Ethan rarely talked about family. Daniel learned how to survive him by becoming exactly what he wanted. Ethan looked down at his hands. I learned by leaving. Claire frowned slightly. Ethan gave a humorless smile. When I was 22, I walked away from the family company for almost 3 years. Started my own tech firm from a tiny office in Brooklyn. Claire blinked softly. She never knew that part. I failed constantly, Ethan admitted. Slept on a couch. Ate cheap noodles 4 nights a week. But for the first time in my life, nobody cared about my last name. Claire's chest tightened hearing it. Because suddenly she understood why Ethan always looked uncomfortable around wealth despite being born into it. Then my father got sick, Ethan continued quietly, and Daniel blamed me for leaving him alone to manage everything. The rain outside intensified harder against the windows. Ethan looked up at her finally. Daniel thinks love makes people weak. He watched our father destroy every relationship he ever had chasing power. Claire stepped closer slowly. And you? Ethan's eyes locked onto hers. I thought the same thing. The honesty in his voice almost hurt. Before Claire could answer, his phone rang sharply. Ethan glanced down once, and his expression instantly darkened. What is it? Claire asked softly. Ethan stood immediately. Daniel just leaked another story. Her stomach dropped. Ethan showed her the screen. This time the headline was worse. Blackwood contract wife secretly meets divorce attorney. Claire's face went pale instantly. What? Ethan looked furious now. They photographed you entering that legal office 3 weeks ago. Claire remembered immediately. She had gone there after their biggest fight, desperate to understand the prenup she signed. She never actually filed anything. But online, facts no longer mattered. Ethan's phone buzzed again. Another message. Then another. Investors panicking. Board members demanding statements. Claire stepped backward slowly. This is exactly what Daniel wanted. Ethan looked at her sharply. Do not do that. Do what? Push me away because things got ugly. His voice lowered dangerously. I am already losing patience with everyone trying to turn you into a villain. Claire's throat tightened painfully. Ethan, your company is collapsing because of me. No, he stepped closer instantly. Because of him. Claire shook her head slowly. Maybe your brother was right about one thing. Ethan's expression hardened immediately. Do not. But Claire forced herself to continue. Maybe people like us really do not belong in the same world. The second the words left her mouth, Ethan looked genuinely wounded. Not angry. Wounded. He moved closer until barely inches separated them. You think I care about worlds? He asked quietly. Claire, I spent my entire life trapped in one. Her eyes burned instantly. Ethan reached into his pocket slowly, then pulled out something small wrapped carefully in tissue paper. I was going to wait, he admitted softly. But apparently life in this family no longer believes in timing. Claire stared as he unfolded the paper. Inside sat the tiny ceramic bookstore keychain she once admired months ago at a Christmas market. Hand-painted. Imperfect. The exact same one she picked up then quietly put back because she could not justify spending $12 on herself. Claire looked up at him speechless. Ethan gave the smallest smile. You thought I did not notice. Emotion slammed into her chest so hard she could barely breathe. Because that was Ethan. Not grand gestures. Not billionaire diamonds. Tiny details nobody else remembered. The bookstore keychain. The $5 mug. Her favorite tea brand magically appearing every week without discussion. He noticed everything. Ethan gently placed the keychain into her hand. I do not know how to do this perfectly, he admitted quietly. But I know I am done pretending this marriage means less to me than it does. Claire's eyes filled instantly. Before she could answer, the penthouse television suddenly turned on automatically behind them. Breaking news alerts flooded the screen. A female reporter appeared live outside the gala downstairs. We are receiving unconfirmed reports that Blackwood board member Daniel Blackwood may call for an emergency vote tonight to remove Ethan Blackwood as CEO. Claire's breath caught. Ethan stared coldly at the screen. Sources claimed the leaked marriage scandal damaged investor confidence beyond repair. Silence crashed across the room. Claire slowly looked back at Ethan. He is not trying to embarrass you, she whispered. Ethan's eyes never left the television. No, his voice turned frighteningly calm again. He is trying to take everything. The reporter continued speaking rapidly while camera flashes exploded outside below. Then suddenly another notification appeared across the bottom of the screen. Leaked audio recording expected tonight. Claire frowned instantly. Audio recording? Ethan looked confused for the first time all day. Then his expression changed completely. Like a horrifying realization hit him all at once. No, he whispered. Claire's pulse quickened. Ethan, what recording? He finally looked at her again. And whatever he saw in her face made his own crumble slightly. The night I asked you to marry me, he said quietly. Daniel recorded the entire conversation. The ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers while a string quartet played softly near the marble staircase. But the atmosphere inside the Blackwood Foundation Gala felt nothing like celebration. Wealthy donors in designer gowns whispered behind champagne glasses. Investors checked stock prices under the tables. Camera flashes burst constantly at the entrance as reporters fought for another headline about the collapsing Blackwood empire. Claire stepped out of the elevator beside Ethan and instantly felt every eye in the room lock onto them. Her silver dress caught the light beautifully, but the tension in Ethan's posture warned everyone not to mistake tonight for a glamorous appearance. He kept one hand lightly against the small of her back as they walked inside together. Protective, possessive, real, and somehow that only made the whispers louder. Claire heard fragments immediately. That is her. The contract wife. She looks nervous. Do you think the marriage survives tonight? Ethan heard them too. His jaw tightened, but he never slowed down. At the center of the ballroom, enormous screens displayed the Foundation's charity campaign for children's literacy programs. Normally tonight would have been Ethan's proudest event of the year. Instead, disaster hovered over every conversation like smoke. Claire leaned closer slightly. Maybe I should leave before the recording drops. Ethan stopped walking instantly. He turned toward her fully despite hundreds of people watching. No, one word. Quiet. Absolute. Claire's heartbeat stumbled. Ethan lowered his voice. If you walk out now, Daniel controls the story. His eyes softened painfully. And I am tired of watching people weaponize your kindness. Before Claire could respond, applause suddenly echoed across the ballroom. Daniel Blackwood had taken the stage. Perfect smile. Perfect tuxedo. Perfect performance. Good evening, everyone. Daniel began smoothly into the microphone. Tonight was supposed to celebrate generosity, family, and trust. Ethan's expression went cold immediately. Daniel continued calmly while cameras rotated toward him. Unfortunately, recent events forced our family into the public eye. The massive screens behind him changed instantly. Headlines appeared. Scandal photos. Marriage documents. Claire's stomach tightened painfully. Daniel sighed dramatically. My brother has always been brilliant. Visionary. But sometimes, even powerful men make emotional decisions with devastating consequences. Murmurs spread across the ballroom. Ethan started toward the stage immediately, but Claire gently caught his arm. Wait. Ethan looked down at her sharply. Claire swallowed hard. If he wants a public show, let him expose himself. Ethan stared at her for one long second, then slowly nodded. On stage, Daniel continued his performance perfectly. I tried to protect this family privately, he said. But transparency matters. Another screen flashed behind him. Audio file loading. Claire's pulse spiked instantly. Around the ballroom, reporters raised phones higher. Daniel looked almost sympathetic now. Tonight you deserve to hear the truth for yourselves. Then the recording started playing through the entire ballroom. Ethan's voice filled the silence first. Calm. Controlled. This arrangement would last 1 year. Claire's breath caught immediately. The recording came from the night Ethan proposed the contract marriage. Her own voice followed softly. Nervous. And after that, Ethan answered in the recording. After that, we both walk away with what we need. The ballroom erupted into whispers instantly. Claire felt heat flood her face. The recording continued. Ethan's old voice sounded colder than she remembered. More guarded. This marriage is practical. Nothing more. Several people in the crowd exchanged knowing looks. Daniel stood on stage pretending regret. I truly wish things had evolved differently, he said sadly. Claire glanced toward Ethan instinctively. His face looked carved from stone. But then suddenly the audio skipped sharply. Static crackled. Daniel frowned slightly backstage. Another voice entered the recording unexpectedly. Ethan again. Softer this time. Vulnerable. You should say no. The ballroom went silent instantly. Claire froze. She never heard this part before. In the recording, her own confused voice answered. What? Ethan exhaled heavily. You are too genuine for this world, Claire. And people like me ruin things we touch. Claire's heart stopped. Daniel's confident expression cracked for the first time. The recording continued playing automatically. Ethan's voice sounded distant now, honest in a way she had never heard before. I do not want to become another person who teaches you not to trust kindness. Claire's eyes burned instantly. Around the ballroom, the whispers completely disappeared. Ethan continued in the recording. But when you walked away earlier tonight, his voice broke slightly. I kept wishing you would come back. Silence swallowed the entire room. Daniel turned sharply toward the technicians near the stage, furious now. Cut the audio, he hissed, under his breath. But it kept playing. Claire remembered that night suddenly with terrifying clarity. The attorney office. The rain outside. Ethan sitting across from her pretending to negotiate a transaction while secretly already terrified of losing her. In the recording, Claire's voice became softer too. Then why are you asking me to marry you? A long silence followed. Then Ethan answered with the rawest honesty anyone in that ballroom had probably ever heard from a billionaire CEO. Because for the first time in years, when I am around you, I do not feel lonely. Claire covered her mouth instantly as emotion crashed through her chest. Gasps spread quietly through the ballroom. This was no longer a scandal recording. This was a confession. Daniel stormed toward the sound booth furiously, while Ethan stared at the floor like the world had just exposed every hidden part of him publicly. The final section of the recording echoed softly across the ballroom. Claire's old voice trembling slightly. "What if this becomes real for one of us?" Ethan answered almost immediately. "That would be the dangerous part." The recording ended. Complete silence followed. No whispers now. No gossip. Just hundreds of people staring at Ethan Blackwood differently than before. Not as a billionaire. Not as a CEO. But as a man hopelessly in love long before he admitted it. Daniel grabbed the microphone again aggressively. "This changes nothing," he snapped. The contract still existed. But suddenly an older woman near the front interrupted him sharply. "So did my arranged marriage 40 years ago," she said coldly. "And my husband still loved me until the day he died." More murmurs followed. Not against Claire now. Against Daniel. Another investor stood slowly. "You leaked private recordings to manipulate shareholders?" Someone else added. This was supposed to be a charity gala. Daniel realized too late the room had shifted completely. His attack no longer looked righteous. It looked cruel. Ethan finally stepped forward toward the stage. "Come again. Dangerous again." Daniel clenched his jaw. "You think they pity you now?" he hissed quietly. Ethan stopped only a few feet away. "No," he answered calmly. "I think they finally see you." Daniel's expression hardened completely. "You always thought love made you better than father." Ethan shook his head slowly. "No, love just made me different from him." The words landed like a blade. Daniel looked genuinely shaken for the first time all night. Ethan turned away from him then. Not angry anymore. Finished. He walked directly back toward Claire while every camera in the ballroom followed him. Claire's heart pounded violently as Ethan stopped in front of her beneath the crystal lights. His eyes searched hers carefully. "Unprotected now. I never wanted you hurt by my world," he admitted quietly. "But losing you scares me more than losing any of this." Around them, the ballroom disappeared into silence. Claire felt tears threaten again. Ethan reached into his pocket slowly. Then he pulled out the folded marriage contract everyone had spent days destroying them over. He looked at it once, then calmly tore it in half in front of the entire room. Gasps echoed instantly. Ethan dropped the pieces onto the ballroom floor without even looking at them. Then he looked back at Claire with terrifying sincerity. "No contracts," he whispered. "No conditions. Just me." For 3 full seconds after Ethan tore the contract apart, nobody inside the ballroom moved. The torn pages drifted slowly across the polished marble floor beneath the crystal chandeliers like the final remains of a war nobody expected him to surrender. Claire stared at him speechless. Around them, cameras flashed nonstop now, but Ethan no longer seemed to care who watched. His entire focus stayed locked on her face. Vulnerable. Unprotected. Real. Then suddenly applause echoed softly from somewhere near the back of the ballroom. One person, then another. The sound spread gradually across the room until dozens of guests stood clapping quietly. Not for the scandal. Not for the billionaire. For the honesty. Daniel stood frozen near the stage, fury burning visibly beneath his calm mask. Ethan barely glanced at him anymore. Claire looked down at the torn contract pieces near her heels and felt something inside her finally break loose. Months of fear, shame, doubt, all of it collapsing at once beneath the weight of one impossible realization. Ethan chose her publicly even when it cost him everything. Her throat tightened painfully. "Ethan," his expression softened instantly at the sound of her voice. Claire shook her head slightly, overwhelmed. "You did not have to do that." Ethan stepped closer through the flashing cameras. "Yes," he said quietly. "I did." The ballroom faded around them. Claire felt tears sting her eyes again. "Your investors will survive. Your board can argue tomorrow." His voice lowered. "I spent my whole life protecting things that never loved me back." Claire's chest ached hearing it. Ethan reached up carefully, brushing one loose strand of blonde hair behind her ear with trembling fingers. Such a small gesture, yet somehow more intimate than every public declaration tonight. "I am done sacrificing real things for people who only value appearances." Claire's breathing unsteady now. Across the ballroom, reporters practically climbed over each other chasing reactions, while Daniel watched his entire plan collapse in real time. One of the older board members suddenly approached Ethan carefully. "Mr. Holloway, 70 years old, one of the company's earliest investors." "Ethan," the man said quietly. Ethan turned slightly. The older man glanced down at the shredded contract on the floor before looking back up. Your grandfather would have hated this scene. Ethan gave a tired half-smile. I assumed so. But unexpectedly, Mr. Holloway smiled back. That is probably why he would have respected it. Ethan blinked, slightly surprised. The older man nodded once toward Claire. The company survived recessions, lawsuits, and market crashes. It will survive one honest love story. Nearby investors murmured in agreement. Daniel noticed instantly. The room had fully turned against him now. His manipulation exposed itself too clearly. Claire watched his face carefully as realization settled in. He was losing control. And people like Daniel feared losing control more than anything. He stepped forward sharply toward Ethan again. Do not pretend this changes what she was to you in the beginning. Silence flickered back across the ballroom. Claire felt tension return instantly. Because despite everything, Daniel still held one painful truth. The marriage started as a transaction. Ethan faced his brother calmly now. No, he said quietly. It changes what she became. Daniel laughed once. Bitter. You are risking a billion-dollar company over feelings. Ethan's expression never shifted. No, I am protecting the only person in this room who never cared about my money. The words landed brutally. Daniel's jaw tightened hard. You are weak now. Ethan stared at him for a long moment, then finally spoke softly. Maybe. His eyes drifted briefly toward Claire. But I have never been happier. Daniel looked genuinely shaken by that answer. Because he expected resistance. Anger. Pride. Not peace. Before he could respond again, another voice interrupted sharply from near the ballroom entrance. Excuse me. Everyone turned instantly. Claire's eyes widened in shock. Jenny rushed breathlessly through the crowd, carrying her phone in one hand and completely ignoring the horrified security guards chasing behind her. Claire blinked rapidly. Jenny. Her best friend looked furious. I have been trying to call you for an hour. Ethan's security team moved closer cautiously, but Claire immediately shook her head. She is with me. Jenny finally reached them, still breathing hard. I found something. Daniel's face subtly changed the second she spoke. Claire noticed instantly. Jenny shoved her phone toward Ethan. One of Daniel's assistants leaked emails anonymously online 20 minutes ago. Ethan took the phone quickly. His eyes scanned the screen once, then hardened immediately. Claire frowned. What is it? Ethan looked up slowly. Proof. Daniel stepped backward almost invisibly. Ethan's voice turned ice cold again. The leaked contract. The fake paparazzi photos. The audio recording edit. He stared directly at his brother now. All orchestrated by Daniel for weeks. Shock rippled through the ballroom instantly. Jenny crossed her arms furiously. Apparently your billionaire brother forgot assistants talk when they get treated badly. Several reporters nearby immediately began typing furiously into phones. Daniel finally snapped. You think any of this matters? He shouted suddenly. The calm polished mask shattered completely now. Guests stared openly. Daniel laughed bitterly. You all worship him because he learned how to fake sincerity better than our father ever did. Ethan said nothing. Daniel looked toward Claire directly. Do you know what happens next? He demanded. Eventually he gets bored. Eventually work matters more again. Men like Ethan do not stay in love. They stay distracted. Claire's stomach tightened slightly. Because part of her once feared exactly that. But before insecurity could spread again, Ethan answered quietly. You are wrong. Daniel scoffed. About what? Ethan looked at Claire with unbearable softness. She was never a distraction. Silence swallowed the room again. Ethan continued calmly. She was the first thing that ever made this life feel meaningful. Claire could not breathe for a second. The sincerity in his voice destroyed every remaining wall inside her. Daniel looked away first. Not angry anymore. Defeated. Security finally approached him carefully near the stage. One executive spoke quietly into his ear about emergency board decisions and legal investigations. Daniel laughed once under his breath before walking toward the exit without another word. As he disappeared through the ballroom doors, the storm outside intensified violently against the windows. But inside, the tension finally broke. Conversations slowly resumed. Reporters shifted focus completely. Headlines changed in real time from scandal to betrayal. Yet Claire barely noticed any of it anymore. Ethan turned fully back toward her beneath the golden chandelier light. Exhaustion shadowed his face deeply now. I am sorry, he whispered. Claire frowned softly. For what? Ethan gave a small, humorless laugh. For dragging you into this family. Claire stared at him quietly for a moment, then finally stepped closer herself this time. You know what the worst part is? She asked softly. Ethan's eyes searched hers carefully. Claire smiled through tears, threatening again. I think I would still choose you. Something inside. Ethan visibly broke at those words. Relief, wonder, disbelief, all crashing across his face at once. Claire glanced down suddenly at the shredded contract pieces still scattered across the ballroom floor. Then she looked back at him. But if we are doing this for real now, Ethan stepped closer instantly. We are. Her heartbeat stumbled at the certainty in his voice. Claire swallowed hard. Then no more protecting me by shutting me out. Ethan nodded slowly. Okay. No more deciding things alone. Okay. Claire took one shaky breath. And no more pretending you do not need people. Ethan's eyes softened painfully. That one might take practice. Claire laughed quietly for the first time in days. Real laughter. Ethan stared at her smile like it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Then, without caring who watched, he reached for her hand slowly and intertwined their fingers together in the middle of the ballroom, while cameras flashed around them like lightning. And for the first time since this marriage began, neither of them felt trapped anymore. The rain finally stopped just before midnight, leaving Manhattan glowing beneath wet streets and blurred reflections while the city continued obsessing over Ethan and Claire across every television screen in America. But for the first time in weeks, neither of them looked at the headlines. The Blackwood penthouse felt strangely quiet after the chaos of the gala. No reporters, no board members, no accusations echoing through marble hallways. Just silence and exhaustion settling over everything at once. Claire stood barefoot near the kitchen island wearing one of Ethan's oversized sweaters now, her silver gala heels abandoned near the elevator hours earlier. The city lights painted soft gold across the windows while steam curled from the untouched tea in her hands. Ethan stood several feet away, loosening his tie slowly, though his eyes kept drifting toward her every few seconds like he still could not quite believe she stayed. Claire noticed it every time. Finally, she gave the smallest tired smile. You can stop looking at me like I might disappear. Ethan paused. A faint, almost embarrassed expression crossed his face. I am working on it. Claire laughed softly under her breath. Real laughter again. Ethan stared at the sound like it physically relieved something inside him. Then his phone buzzed sharply against the counter. Ethan glanced down once before muting it immediately. Claire frowned slightly. Bad. Ethan exhaled heavily. The board officially suspended Daniel tonight pending investigation. Claire blinked softly. That fast. Ethan nodded once. The leaked emails destroyed him. Silence settled briefly again. Claire looked down into her tea. He looked sad when he left. Ethan leaned back against the counter slowly. Daniel stopped trusting people a long time ago. His voice held no triumph, only exhaustion. Claire studied him carefully. Are you worried about him? Ethan gave a quiet, humorless laugh. I spent years trying to fix him. His eyes drifted toward the dark windows. Eventually, you realize some people only feel powerful when everyone else feels broken. Claire swallowed softly, because part of her understood now why Ethan carried loneliness like armor. Growing up inside a family where love always came second to appearances changed people permanently. She looked toward him again. You are nothing like your father. Ethan's eyes lifted back to hers immediately. Something vulnerable flickered there. I almost became him. Claire shook her head gently. No. Ethan stared at her carefully. Claire stepped closer across the kitchen slowly. You know what your father would have done tonight? She asked softly. Ethan said nothing. Claire's voice lowered. He would have protected the company first. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. Claire reached out carefully, then took his hand. You protected me. The room fell completely still around them. Ethan looked down at their intertwined fingers like the simple contact affected him more than any boardroom battle ever could. Claire, his voice roughened slightly. I need you to understand something. She looked up slowly. Ethan stepped closer. The contract was real. Claire's chest tightened briefly, but she nodded once. I know. Ethan shook his head. No. I convinced myself it was enough. His eyes darkened with regret. I thought if I controlled the rules, controlled the ending, then I could avoid. He stopped himself. Claire whispered softly, getting hurt. Ethan laughed quietly without humor, looking pathetic. Her heart ached instantly hearing that. Because for a man the world called powerful, Ethan still feared vulnerability more than failure. Claire squeezed his hand gently. You know what is funny? Ethan looked at her carefully. Claire smiled faintly. You looked more terrifying tonight telling a ballroom full of billionaires you loved me than you ever did in those business magazines. To her surprise, Ethan actually laughed. Low. Genuine. The sound transformed him completely. Claire stared, slightly mesmerized. Ethan noticed immediately. What? Claire shook her head once, smiling now. Nothing. I just realized I have never seen you relax before. Ethan's expression softened deeply. That is because until you, I was never relaxed. The honesty of it hit her hard again. Before Claire could answer, another knock echoed unexpectedly at the penthouse door. Ethan frowned instantly. It was nearly 1 a.m. He moved toward the entrance cautiously while Claire followed behind. When Ethan opened the door, both of them froze. Daniel stood outside alone. No security, no cameras, no polished billionaire composure left. Rainwater darkened his coat slightly, and exhaustion hollowed his face. Ethan's posture immediately hardened again. You have 5 seconds. Daniel ignored the threat. His eyes drifted briefly toward Claire before settling back on his brother. I came to warn you. Ethan stared coldly. About what? Daniel exhaled slowly. Father's old legal team. Claire frowned slightly. Daniel continued quietly. When the board removes me officially tomorrow, they will come after Ethan next. Ethan scoffed once. Let them try. But Daniel shook his head sharply. You still do not understand. His voice lowered. Father buried money offshore years ago. Illegal accounts. Fake charities. If investigators start digging through Blackwood finances after tonight, Ethan's expression changed instantly. Claire felt tension snap back into the room. Why? Are you telling me this now? Ethan asked coldly. Daniel looked away briefly. Because despite everything, his jaw tightened painfully. You were still the only person in this family who ever tried to love me. Silence swallowed the doorway completely. Claire watched Ethan carefully. Shock, anger, hurt, all colliding behind his eyes at once. Daniel gave a bitter laugh under his breath. Do not misunderstand. I still think love makes people weak. His gaze flickered briefly toward Claire again. But apparently weak people sleep better at night. Ethan stayed silent for several long seconds. Finally, he spoke quietly. You leaked private recordings of my wife. Daniel nodded once. I know. You tried to destroy her publicly. Another nod. I know. Ethan's voice hardened. And now you expect help? Daniel looked genuinely exhausted now. No, he reached into his coat slowly and handed Ethan a thin envelope. Just take this before the lawyers erase everything. Ethan hesitated briefly before taking it. Daniel stepped backward toward the elevator almost immediately afterward. Claire suddenly spoke for the first time. Daniel. He stopped. Claire looked at him carefully. You were wrong about one thing. Daniel waited silently. Claire's voice softened. Love does not make people weak. Her eyes drifted toward Ethan briefly before returning to him. It just gives them something worth protecting. For a second, Daniel looked strangely lost hearing that. Like some deeply buried part of him wanted to believe it too. But then the elevator doors opened behind him and the expression vanished. Goodbye, Claire. Then he disappeared into the elevator without another word. Silence settled again after the doors closed. Ethan looked down slowly at the envelope in his hand. His expression unreadable now. Claire stepped closer carefully. What do you think is inside? Ethan stared at the envelope for one long moment. Then finally answered quietly. Probably enough to destroy my father's legacy forever. Claire's stomach tightened slightly. Ethan looked exhausted again suddenly. Older somehow. She reached for his hand once more instinctively. Ethan looked at her immediately. Claire gave the faintest smile. Then I guess tomorrow is going to be another disaster. To her surprise, Ethan smiled back softly. Probably. Claire leaned her head lightly against his shoulder for the first time without hesitation. Ethan visibly stilled beneath the touch before relaxing slowly around her. Outside, Manhattan glowed quietly beneath the fading storm, while somewhere far below, strangers still argued online about whether their marriage was real. But standing there together in the silent penthouse with no contract left between them, neither Ethan nor Claire needed an answer anymore. The sunrise over Manhattan arrived pale and cold, spilling silver light across the Blackwood penthouse, while the city below woke up hungry for another scandal. But inside the quiet apartment, the atmosphere felt different now. Still fragile. Still uncertain. yet calmer somehow. Claire sat cross-legged on the enormous living room rug, wearing soft gray sweatpants, and one of Ethan's old Columbia University hoodies she found folded in the back of his closet at 3 in the morning after neither of them managed to sleep. The oversized sleeves covered half her hands while untouched coffee cooled beside her on the glass table. Across from her, dozens of papers from Daniel's envelope covered the floor. Offshore accounts, fake charities, hidden financial transfers dating back almost 15 years. Claire looked up slowly toward Ethan, standing near the windows with his phone pressed against his ear. His voice stayed calm during the entire call, but she noticed the tension in his shoulders immediately. "No," Ethan said quietly into the phone. "We report everything ourselves before investigators find it." A pause. Ethan's jaw tightened. "I do not care what the shareholders prefer." Another pause. "Then they can replace me." Claire stared at him silently as he ended the call. Ethan lowered the phone slowly and rubbed one exhausted hand across his face. "That sounded bad," Claire murmured softly. Ethan looked toward her immediately. Even exhausted, his expression softened automatically whenever their eyes met now. "The board wants damage control," he admitted. "They are hoping we can bury part of the scandal before federal investigators get involved." Claire frowned. "And you?" Ethan walked closer slowly. "I spent too many years watching this family hide ugly things behind expensive walls." He glanced down toward the scattered papers. "I am done protecting ghosts." Claire studied him carefully while morning light spilled across the room. She realized suddenly how different Ethan looked from the man she married 6 months ago. The sharp billionaire edges still existed. The control, the intelligence, the intimidating calm. But now there was something else too. Honesty. He no longer looked like a man constantly bracing for betrayal. Ethan noticed her staring and gave a tired, faint smile. "What?" Claire shook her head softly. "Nothing." Then after a second she admitted quietly, "You look lighter." Ethan blinked, slightly surprised. Claire smiled faintly. "Still terrifying. Just less lonely." Something emotional flickered across his face instantly. He crouched beside her on the rug, expensive dress shirt wrinkled from an entire sleepless night. Claire's heartbeat stumbled slightly at the closeness. Ethan looked down at the financial documents scattered around them. "Do you regret this?" Claire frowned softly. "What?" Ethan's eyes lifted carefully toward hers. "Vulnerable again. Meeting me." The question hurt more than she expected. Claire reached over slowly and took his hand without hesitation. "Ethan." He held her gaze silently. Claire squeezed his fingers gently. "I regret the pain." Her voice softened. "Not you." Ethan looked down briefly like he needed a second to recover from hearing that. Before either could speak again, Claire's phone suddenly exploded with notifications across the table. Ethan's expression immediately darkened. Claire hesitated before checking it. Her stomach tightened instantly. "What now?" Ethan asked quietly. Claire stared at the screen in disbelief. "The internet turned against Daniel overnight." Ethan frowned slightly. Claire showed him quickly. Every major news outlet now focused on Daniel's manipulation instead of the marriage scandal. Headlines praised Ethan for exposing family corruption voluntarily. Even stranger, thousands of comments defended Claire now too. She blinked, reading one aloud softly. She stayed even after learning the truth. "That girl actually loves him." Ethan watched her carefully. "How does that feel?" Claire laughed once under her breath. "Terrifying." Ethan smiled faintly at that. But before the fragile peace could settle fully, another notification appeared. Live press conference. Blackwood Tower. 11 a.m. Ethan's expression hardened immediately. "The board moved faster than I expected." Claire frowned. "What happens at 11? Ethan stood slowly again. "Either I confess everything publicly," his voice darkened slightly, "or they remove me before I can." Silence stretched across the room. Claire slowly stood too. "Then I am coming with you." Ethan's head snapped toward her immediately. "No." Claire crossed her arms instantly. "That was fast." Ethan moved closer carefully. "Claire, today is going to be ugly. So I do not want you standing in front of cameras while my family implodes publicly." Claire stared at him for one long second, then quietly asked, "Are you protecting me again?" Ethan stopped speaking immediately. Claire stepped closer now. "You promised no more shutting me out." Ethan exhaled heavily. "That promise already feels impossible." Claire almost smiled despite the tension. "Good. Keep practicing." Ethan looked genuinely torn now. his instinct to shield her fighting visibly against the fact that she no longer wanted shielding. Finally, he gave a small defeated nod. Okay. Claire smiled softly. Okay. 3 hours later, Blackwood Tower looked like a war zone. News vans crowded the streets. Reporters shouted questions through barricades while camera flashes exploded non-stop against the building entrance. Inside the private elevator, Claire stood beside Ethan wearing a simple cream blouse and dark jeans while he adjusted the cuffs of his charcoal suit silently. The contrast between them felt almost absurd. Billionaire CEO beside bookstore employee. Yet somehow they fit together perfectly now. Ethan glanced toward her reflection in the elevator mirror. You still have time to run. Claire raised one eyebrow. Do I look like a runner? Ethan's mouth twitched slightly. No, the elevator doors opened directly onto the executive press floor. Noise exploded instantly beyond the hallway. Claire's pulse spiked hard despite herself. Ethan noticed immediately. Without speaking, he reached for her hand quietly. The gesture grounded her instantly. Together, they stepped toward the press room. Hundreds of reporters packed the massive conference hall shoulder to shoulder, while television crews prepared for live broadcasts nationwide. Board members lined the side walls looking pale and exhausted. Claire noticed empty seats where Daniel once sat. Ethan walked calmly toward the podium while whispers rippled through the crowd. Then suddenly someone near the back shouted loudly, "Is the marriage real or not?" Silence crashed instantly across the room. Cameras zoomed forward. Ethan stopped walking. Claire felt every muscle in his body tense beside her. Slowly, Ethan turned toward the crowd. Yes, he answered simply. No hesitation. No performance. Just truth. The room erupted instantly with overlapping questions. Did the marriage begin as a financial arrangement? Did Claire Brooks know about the inheritance clause? Will investors sue? Ethan stepped up to the podium calmly, while Claire remained beside him instead of behind him. Reporters noticed immediately. Ethan adjusted the microphone once. Today is not about my marriage, he said evenly. It is about corruption tied to the Blackwood family over many years. His voice never shook. This morning, I submitted financial evidence directly to federal investigators regarding illegal offshore accounts connected to former Blackwood executives. Shocked murmurs spread instantly. Several board members looked visibly horrified hearing him confirm it publicly. Ethan continued calmly. The company will cooperate fully. Then unexpectedly, he stepped away from the prepared statement entirely. I spent most of my life believing success meant control, he admitted quietly. Control over emotions. Appearances. Weakness. Claire watched him carefully beside the stage. Ethan glanced briefly toward her before continuing. But the truth is hiding behind. Perfection nearly turned me into someone I did not respect. The room felt quieter now. More human. Ethan looked directly into the cameras. People asked whether my marriage was real. He exhaled softly. The contract was real. My feelings were not supposed to be. Claire's chest tightened instantly hearing him say it publicly. Ethan's eyes drifted toward her again with unmistakable warmth. Then somewhere along the way, she became the first person who made me want to be honest instead of impressive. Silence swallowed the room completely. Claire felt emotion rise sharply in her throat again. Ethan looked back toward the cameras. So if you are asking whether I love my wife, his voice softened slightly. Yes. More than I know how to explain properly. Flashbulbs exploded non-stop across the conference hall, while Claire stared at him speechless. And for the first time in her life, Ethan Blackwood looked completely free. 6 months later, the first snow of December drifted softly across Manhattan, while warm golden lights glowed through the windows of a tiny independent bookstore on the Upper West Side. The handwritten sign above the entrance read Brooks and Blackwood Books in elegant gold lettering, though Claire still smiled every single time she saw the second name there. Inside, soft jazz played quietly while customers wandered between decorated shelves carrying coffee cups and holiday shopping bags. The entire store smelled like cinnamon candles, fresh paper, and snowfall. Claire stood on a small ladder near the front display, adjusting a string of white lights when the bell above the door chimed softly. "We are technically closed," she called automatically without looking down. A familiar deep voice answered immediately. "You said that 3 nights ago, too." Claire laughed before she even turned around. Ethan stood near the entrance wearing a dark wool coat dusted lightly with snowflakes, while several overworked security guards waited awkwardly outside, pretending not to stare into the bookstore windows. Ethan held a small paper bag from her favorite bakery in one hand and looked impossibly out of place and perfectly at home at the same time. Claire climbed down the ladder, smiling. "You are late." Ethan glanced at his watch seriously. 3 minutes. That is late for you." He stepped closer slowly. "I was buying emergency apology pastries." Claire looked toward the bakery bag suspiciously. "Chocolate croissants." Ethan's mouth twitched slightly. "Obviously." Claire laughed softly again. The sound still affected him every single time. She noticed it instantly. Ethan still looked at her sometimes like he had not fully adjusted to happiness yet. 6 months earlier, federal investigators exposed decades of illegal Blackwood financial corruption tied directly to Ethan's father and several former executives. Daniel disappeared from public life completely after resigning from the board. Ethan voluntarily stepped down as CEO during the investigation, shocking Wall Street. Every financial magazine in America called him reckless, insane, self-destructive. Ethan called it peaceful. Claire crossed her arms lightly. "You know, most billionaires buy yachts during existential crises." Ethan removed his coat slowly. "I bought a bookstore." Claire smiled wider. Worst billionaire stereotype ever. The truth was simpler than headlines understood. 3 months after the scandal, Ethan quietly invested in saving Claire's struggling bookstore building from corporate developers planning luxury apartments. He refused to put his name anywhere near the project until Claire secretly added Blackwood beside Brooks on the sign herself. Ethan stared at the bookstore sign for almost 10 full minutes after seeing it the first time. Claire still remembered the look on his face, like someone handed him a home instead of a business. Ethan set the pastry bag on the counter before glancing around the decorated shop. "You stayed late, organizing again." Claire shrugged casually. "Holiday inventory." Ethan raised one eyebrow. "You alphabetized the wrapping paper." Claire looked offended immediately. "Presentation matters." Ethan laughed quietly under his breath. Softer now than before. "Easier." Claire walked toward him slowly through the warm bookstore lights. "How was the meeting?" Ethan exhaled once. "Long." Claire studied him carefully. "Bad long or boring long?" Ethan loosened his scarf slightly. "My attorneys think I should consider returning to corporate leadership eventually." Claire blinked softly. "Do you want to?" Ethan looked around the little bookstore again before answering. Snow drifted quietly outside the windows while a young couple wandered past carrying Christmas shopping bags. Finally, Ethan looked back at her. "Honestly." Claire nodded once. Ethan's expression softened. "I like this life better." Her chest tightened warmly hearing it, because she knew exactly what he meant. Mornings drinking coffee together before opening the store. Ethan pretending he hated shelving books while secretly memorizing customer recommendations. Quiet dinners without cameras. Weekend train rides outside the city. Real life. Simple life. Peaceful life. Claire stepped closer. "You know," she teased softly, "for someone who married me for an inheritance, you adapted suspiciously well to domestic happiness." Ethan looked almost offended. "Claire." She grinned. "I am kidding." But Ethan's expression suddenly turned serious. "I know." Claire blinked slightly at the shift in his tone. Ethan reached into his coat pocket slowly. "Actually." Claire immediately narrowed her eyes. "That is the face you make before emotionally dangerous conversations." Ethan laughed once under his breath. "Probably." He pulled out a small folded paper carefully. Not a velvet ring box. Not diamonds. Just paper. Claire frowned slightly. "What is that?" Ethan handed it to her silently. Claire unfolded it slowly, then completely froze. Her eyes widened instantly. It was the original marriage contract, or what remained of it. The torn pieces had been carefully restored together between clear protective sheets. Except now every legal paragraph was crossed out in black ink. Only one blank line remained visible at the bottom beside Ethan's signature. Claire looked up speechless. Ethan's voice softened quietly. "I spent most of my life thinking commitments only survived when protected by rules." Claire's throat tightened instantly. Ethan glanced down briefly before continuing. "Then you ruined that theory." Snow continued drifting quietly outside, while warm lights reflected softly around them. Ethan took one slow breath. "The first time I asked you to marry me, I offered conditions." His eyes lifted back toward hers fully now. "Open. Honest. This time I only have a question." Claire's heartbeat stumbled hard. Ethan stepped closer until barely inches separated them in the middle of the quiet bookstore. Claire Brooks. His voice roughened slightly with emotion. Would you marry me again? Tears filled her eyes immediately. Ethan gave the smallest nervous laugh. Preferably without billion-dollar scandals this time. Claire laughed through tears at the same moment. The sound broke whatever remaining tension existed between them. She looked down at the restored contract again, then slowly reached for the pen Ethan pulled from his pocket. Her hand trembled slightly as she signed her name beside his. Not beneath legal conditions. Beside him. Equal. Ethan watched her finish signing like he could barely breathe. Claire looked up smiling softly through tears. There. Ethan stared at the signature for one silent second before whispering almost to himself, You have no idea what that means to me. Claire stepped closer instantly. Then explain it. Ethan looked at her carefully. It means someone finally chose me after seeing all the ugly parts. Claire's heart shattered quietly hearing that. She reached up, gently touching his face. Ethan. He leaned into her hand instinctively now. No hesitation anymore. No fear of needing someone. Claire smiled softly. You know what the funny part is? Ethan's eyes searched hers. What? She laughed quietly. I think I fell first. Something emotional cracked across Ethan's face immediately. He pulled her gently against him then, forehead resting softly against hers while snow-covered Manhattan outside the glowing bookstore windows. Neither noticed the small crowd gathering across the street staring through the glass at the former billionaire CEO, standing in the middle of a tiny bookstore looking at his wife like she hung the stars by hand. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Blackwood no longer cared who was watching.